Have you ever felt in a situation where the solution seemed impossible? Israel lived through this for 18 long years, under the cruel yoke of King Eglon, with no hope of deliverance. But God had a plan, and he chose an unusual man to carry it out. Ehud, a left-handed judge. In this video, you'll discover how Ehud used his faith, courage, and an unexpected strategy to defeat the oppressor and change the fate of an entire nation. We'll explore how this story, full of twists and turns, teaches us that God can use even our most unusual characteristics to bring deliverance and peace. Get ready for a journey of faith and action, where the improbable becomes possible. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss out on this channel's biblical productions. This is the second video in the series, The Judges of Israel. The playlist for this series is available in the description and at the end of this video. That said, let's get to the story of Judge Ehud. The story of Ehud begins in one of the darkest phases of Israel's history. Imagine the situation. The people who once experienced the miraculous liberation from Egypt, and then 40 years of prosperity after God's deliverance through Othniel, as we discussed in the previous video, now found themselves once again subjugated, this time under a new oppressor, King Eglon of the Moabites. Why did this happen? The answer lies in disobedience. Over time, the people of God began to stray from the Lord's commandments and practice what was evil in his sight. They worshipped idols and adopted the customs of the pagan nations around them, forgetting the promises and covenant they had made with God. As a result, God allowed Israel to fall into the hands of Eglon, a tyrant king who would remind them of the weight of disobedience. Now imagine what it was like to live under the rule of this king. For 18 long years, Israel was oppressed, forced to pay heavy tributes. Each tribute felt like a deeper humiliation, as if every coin handed over to King Eglon was a constant reminder that Israel had lost its freedom. Eglon was not just an ordinary ruler. He was described as a fat and powerful man, a symbol of indulgence and cruelty. His physical presence reflected the literal weight of the oppression he imposed on the people of Israel. During those years, the people of God lived under a constant climate of fear. They had nowhere to run, their lands were under control, and their resources were drained to feed Eglon's greed. The Moabites dominated the fertile and strategic regions of Israel, leaving the nation under an unbearable burden. Despair was palpable. Families questioned whether they would ever be free again. And in the midst of this, what can you do when everything seems lost? It was at this moment of deep anguish that something changed. The people, hopeless and exhausted by so much suffering, finally do what they should have done all along. They cry out to God. Israel's cry went up to heaven, and, as on previous occasions, God heard it. The Lord, in his infinite mercy, decided to act again. But the answer to the people's prayer would come in an unexpected way. That's when God raised up Ehud, the second judge of Israel. At first glance, Ehud seemed like an ordinary man. He wasn't a famous warrior, nor was he someone of great political influence. But to God, Ehud was the right person. He had something special, a heart willing to obey and a unique characteristic that would be vital to Israel's deliverance. With the choice of Ehud, God began to pave the way for his people's liberation. What was about to unfold would be nothing short of extraordinary. Ehud's story, which begins with an oppressed people submissive to King Eglon, teaches us that even in the darkest moments, when everything seems lost, God hears the cry of those who turn back to him. And what follows proves that God not only listens, but also acts in surprising ways to bring deliverance to his people. Text hero. What makes Ehud so special in this story? Among all the men of Israel, he was different in a way that at the time might have been seen as insignificant. Ehud was left-handed. And you may wonder, why is that important? In those days, being left-handed was not common, and it certainly wasn't valued. Most people use their right hand, especially in combat or leadership situations. However, this unique characteristic of Ehud would be the key to the ingenious plan that God had in mind. Ehud was entrusted with an extremely dangerous mission: to bring tribute to King Eglon. We already know that for 18 long years, Israel had suffered under this tyrant's rule, and now they were obliged to regularly hand over wealth as payment for peace that never really existed. But Ehud saw beyond simply handing over tribute. He knew that this was his chance to free Israel. It was the perfect time to act. However, Ehud couldn't simply walk up and challenge Eglon directly. That would have been a death sentence. He needed a cunning plan, and so he made a crucial decision. Ehud forged a two-edged dagger. It wasn't a large sword, but a short and lethal blade, perfect for a stealthy attack. And where did he hide it? He strapped this dagger to his right thigh, beneath his clothes. Why is this so important? Because the palace guards were used to checking the left side of visitors, where most people, being right-handed, would carry their weapons. Ehud, being left-handed, slipped through unnoticed. Imagine the tension as Ehud walked through the palace gates, the hidden dagger at his side, his heart racing but filled with courage and conviction. Every step brought him closer to the decisive moment, but his trust was in something greater than himself. Ehud knew that God was with him, guiding his every move, opening the path for the fulfillment of a greater plan. Ehud delivered the tribute to King Eglon, fulfilling the formalities that everyone expected. But he didn't stop there. After presenting the gifts, he asked to speak privately with the king, claiming to have a secret message from God. Eglon, arrogant and self-assured, was intrigued. He dismissed all his servants and guards, leaving himself alone with Ehud. This was the moment Ehud had been waiting for. The room was silent, the king relaxed and defenseless, unaware that God's judgment was about to be executed. This moment in Ehud's story teaches us something profound. God can use even the characteristics we consider uncommon or insignificant to fulfill his purposes. Ehud, with his left-handed skill, was about to bring liberation to Israel. What many might have seen as a weakness, God transformed into a strategic weapon. And so, with courage, faith, and an ingenious plan, Ehud was about to change the destiny of an entire nation. We arrive at one of the most tense and decisive moments in the story of Ehud. Picture the scene. Ehud, carrying the heavy tribute, enters the palace of Eglon, the Moabite king who had oppressed Israel for 18 years. The palace is luxurious, filled with riches collected from the tributes forced upon the people of God. Eglon, sitting on his throne, is known not only for his power as a king, but also for his appearance. The Bible describes Eglon as an extremely fat man, a reflection of his indulgence and oppression. Ehud, with a calm exterior, delivers the tribute, but inside, he is already prepared for the decisive act that will change the course of Israel's history. After delivering the tribute, Ehud, filled with the courage God had given him, made an unexpected request. He claimed to have a secret message from God for the king. Eglon, curious and arrogant, was intrigued. What could this special message be? He dismissed all his servants from the room, confident that Ehud was unarmed and posed no apparent threat. The hall became silent. Now, only Eglon and Ehud remained, face to face. Imagine the rising tension in that moment. Ehud knew he had only one chance and he needed to act quickly and precisely. Eglon, on the other hand, was completely at ease, unaware that God's judgment was about to fall upon him. With all the servants and guards out of the room, Ehud seized the opportunity. In one swift movement, he drew the two-edged dagger he had hidden on his right thigh, and before Eglon could react, plunged it deep into his stomach. The Bible gives us a shocking detail about this moment. Eglon's fat covered the blade of the dagger, so much so that Ehud couldn't even pull it back out. Eglon died instantly, without time to scream or call for help. The oppressive king, who had crushed the people of Israel for so long, was now defeated by a single act of courage and faith from a man chosen by God. Eglon's death was not just the removal of a tyrant, it was a strategic blow that destabilized the Moabite control over Israel. Acting quickly, Ehud locked the doors of the hall before escaping. He knew that time was crucial. No one had yet realized what had happened, and Ehud needed to flee before the king's servants discovered the truth. He calmly left the palace, without raising any suspicion. When Eglon's servants finally noticed that the doors were locked, they assumed the king was resting or attending to personal matters and hesitated to disturb him for quite some time. This gave Ehud the necessary advantage to escape safely. This moment marked a turning point in Israel's history. Eglon's death was not just an act of revenge, it was the beginning of the liberation God had planned for his people. Ehud's bold tactic demonstrated that when God leads, even the most daring and improbable plans can succeed. Here we see God's hand acting in a surprising way, using an ordinary man to accomplish something extraordinary. God's justice came through a courageous strategy, and the fate of Israel was about to change forever. After the dramatic moment of King Eglon's death, Ehud knew that time was of the essence. He needed to leave the palace before the king's servants discovered what had happened. With precision and calm, he locked the doors and fled silently, raising no suspicion. Every step he took brought him closer to his greater mission, to liberate Israel. Now, with Eglon dead, the Moabite kingdom was vulnerable, but the battle was far from over. Ehud fled to the mountains of Ephraim, a strategic location known for its elevated terrain and as a safe meeting place for the Israelites. Picture the scene. Ehud, breathless but determined, arrives at the mountains with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the first part of his plan had been completed, but now the real test lay ahead, gathering the people of Israel for the decisive battle. Ehud could have relied on the fact that Eglon's death had destabilized the Moabites, but he understood that Israel's full liberation would require more than just an assassination. It would demand action, courage, and the unity of the people. Then, Ehud made a symbolic and powerful move. He blew the trumpet, its sound echoing through the mountains of Ephraim, calling all the men of Israel to gather under his leadership. The trumpet's blast was not just a call to war, it was a signal of hope, that the yoke of oppression was about to be broken. The people who had been subjugated for so long responded immediately to the call. Men from all over Israel began to assemble, ready to fight for their freedom. Ehud, now the undisputed leader, stood at the head of a motivated army determined to end Moabite domination. With Eglon dead, the Moabites were disorganized, leaderless, and vulnerable. They did not expect such a swift attack, and this was Ehud's advantage. He knew that the time to act was now, before the enemies had a chance to regroup. Leading the Israelite army, Ehud guided the people with confidence. He wasn't just leading a physical battle, it was a spiritual one, knowing that God was directing every move. This moment in the story teaches us a valuable lesson. Faith and action must go hand in hand. Ehud fully trusted in God, but he also knew that it was necessary to act with courage and determination. He didn't sit back and wait for something to happen. He took leadership, guided by his faith, and made the decisive move. The people of Israel, once discouraged and oppressed, were now marching into battle with a new spirit of courage and hope. Ehud's leadership was an example of how faith can inspire action. He believed that God had given him the opportunity to liberate the people, but he also understood that he had a role to play in this plan. Under his leadership, Israel was ready to fight, not with fear but with confidence that God had called them for this moment. Under Ehud's courageous leadership, the moment for the decisive battle finally arrived. Picture the battlefield. The Israelites, once an oppressed and divided people, now stood with strength and courage, united by a single purpose. On the other side, the Moabites, still disoriented by the sudden death of their King Eglon, were unprepared for the strategic and relentless attack that was about to come. Ehud, inspired and guided by his trust in God, led his men with determination. He knew this was more than just a physical war. It was a battle for the spiritual liberation of Israel. The Israelites advanced against the Moabites, and in a surprising turn, they eliminated around 10,000 enemy soldiers, all strong and valiant men. This was no small victory. Each Moabite soldier that fell represented more than a defeated enemy. It was a step toward Israel's complete freedom. The battle was hard-fought but decisive. God was with his people, and Ehud's army prevailed, completely defeating Moab's forces. Now imagine the joy of the people of Israel. For 18 long years they had lived under Eglon's tyranny, paying heavy tributes, living in constant fear, and bearing the weight of oppression that seemed never-ending. But on that day, everything changed. The sounds of war turned into shouts of celebration. Israel had won its freedom, and the enemy who had dominated them for so long was finally defeated. The Israelite families, who once feared for their future, now looked ahead with renewed hope. The victory brought more than immediate freedom. It brought lasting peace. Under Ehud's leadership, Israel entered a time of tranquility that would last for 80 years. Imagine, 80 years without war, without oppression, without the fear of invasions. The land of Israel flourished once again, cities were rebuilt, and the people were free to worship God without the constant threats from surrounding enemies. It was a time of renewal, not just for the nation, but for the hearts of the people. They turned back to God, recognizing that their liberation and peace were the result of His intervention. Ehud's story teaches us a powerful lesson. God doesn't need grand heroes or mighty armies to bring about deliverance. He uses ordinary people, like Ehud, to accomplish great things. Ehud wasn't a king or a famous warrior, but he was a man of faith and willing to obey God. This obedience led to the fall of an oppressor who seemed invincible and brought peace to an entire nation. This victory wasn't just a military triumph. It was a demonstration of God's power and the importance of faith and obedience. With faith in God, even the greatest oppressors can be defeated. And just as Israel experienced 80 years of peace, we too can find that peace in our lives when we trust in God and follow His ways. Ehud's story reminds us that, with God by our side, victory is always within reach, and peace can be restored, no matter how dark the times of oppression may seem. Now write in the comments if you already know the story of Ehud the judge who delivered Israel from King Eglon. Remember that you can find this story in chapter 3 of the book of Judges in your Bible. May God richly bless your life. See you in the next video.